This library is really silent. I guess it's a quiet place. Hey, what's up, and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where today I'm going to be talking about one of my most anticipated films of this year. It's A Quiet Place. Taking place immediately after the events of the first film, the Abbott family take the solution that they discovered in the first flick and leave their home now burned to the ground, and they run into a family friend, Emmett, played by Cillian Murphy. While on this journey, the deaf daughter Reagan hatches a heroic plan to save the world, but when everybody else fears for her safety in doing so, she decides to head out on those treacherous roads alone, unable to hear the dangers that stalk her. So, like most others, I wasn't entirely sure what this movie could even do in terms of keeping things fresh. They had already found a cure, so to speak, in the first film, so what more is there to say? Well, as it turns out, that probably is my biggest negative here, that if you were tasked to come up with a story on your own as to where this story could essentially go, you'd probably come up with the same story seen here. You have a solution that kills the aliens, but only you can use it. The rest of the world is still in trouble. So how do you mass produce that solution to save everybody else, right? Pretty similar to what you might see in a zombie film, actually. So in terms of originality, A Quiet Place 2 is definitely lacking in that department. More than that, it's pretty predictable as far as the writing goes. But, and this is a giant, bodacious but, the writing is only one aspect of the film, and the end is only one thing that happens. It's one of those films where the journey on how you get there is much more enticing than anything else. This film is just as crazily tense as the first film, as I was literally and figuratively on the edge of my seat throughout the runtime. Look, one thing that you know at the end of the first movie is that this family has just given birth to a baby in a zombie-infected world that attacks sound. Y'all know how much sound a baby makes? There's just so much added tension in this film, all because of that blasted baby. Throughout the runtime of the film, they stuff this baby into a box strapped to an oxygen tank. That way, the aliens aren't the only threat, but so is suffocation. Because if that wasn't enough of a threat in terms of suffocation, there's also a location in the film that this family often retreat to that also has limited air. And every time they go into this thing, there's a risk of it being locked and them getting trapped inside. And of course, they often take this baby into the thing as well, because why not? Now, one thing that I thought was very smart here was that unlike the first film, the sequel looks at the idea that there's also bad people in the world. While the first primarily dialed in on aliens as the only threat, this insisted that there was more out there, like bad people, for instance. Think about it. What would people like that be up to? That makes sense. If we already have a way to kill the aliens, the threat that they pose isn't as strong as the first film, so it needed something more. One thing must not be ignored, though: the cinematography, editing, visuals, and the use of sound, or lack thereof, is still all pristine. I specifically love the editing of the film, as at one point, our characters are all kind of separated, and they're all doing different things. But instead of getting really watered thin, which I feel like would normally happen in other films, the editing of the film keeps everything in check, and it uses some crazy mirroring that ties all these scenes together in a really effective and unique way. The acting, you can't gloss over that either. Cillian Murphy was the added face this time around, and he did a phenomenal job, as always, but so did the kids in the film, who I think had a much stronger focus than they ever had in the first film. And everybody had fantastic chemistry. Let's go ahead and break down my final score. From a technical perspective, that's mostly where this film is at. Even though the writing is mostly just as standard, stereotypical stuff, there was still an insane focus on visuals, cinematography, editing, music, sound, acting, casting, chemistry, and finding areas that make an audience member simply feel uncomfortable. It knows how to up the ante in terms of tension, and it pulls it off very, very well. This score is 90%. And as for my bias score, that's even higher, because I love it when a movie like this can affect my viewing experience, as it was all about tension here. I couldn't care less that the story itself was a little bit mediocre at times, or even predictable, because it was, like I mentioned, it was all about the journey on how they got there. And it's that journey alone that I thought was magnificent. This score is 98%. Averaging out the two scores together would come to the final rating of 94%. 94 out of 100 possible stars, or an A letter grade. If you're wondering on how I scored the first film, I scored that 95%, so it's pretty much on par with the first, even though I probably prefer the first overall. And also, if you're wondering on where I rank this movie in my list of 2021 films, in first place, it overtook Cruella, the film I previously had in first place, by 1%. I had that scored 93. So I initially was worried about Cruella beating A Quiet Place because I scored it so high. Guess I'm not worrying anymore. This sequel was everything that I wanted it to be and more. Guys, what did you think about A Quiet Place 2? Have you seen it? Are you looking forward to it? I want to know in the comments section down below. And as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit that like, subscribe button, and bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. And until then, peace out.
Dave examines movies. We just watch for fun. Davey is the expert. He is the #1.